Welcome back to a new episode of Business Beyond the Game. I'm your host, Eric Jackson, and I'm joined by a special guest, one who represents the red, white, and blue on the pitch for the men's national soccer team. Ladies and gentlemen, Tyler Adams. Tyler, how are you, man?
I'm excellent, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for taking the time to come on. Tyler, let's talk about the tri-state a little bit. You grew up in a small town, Wappingers Falls, New York. A handful of years later, the FA Cup trophy is now making a stop to New York City. What does that just mean to you? It seems like a full circle moment a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, being a kid from a small town in New York, upstate New York, whenever I tell someone I'm from New York, they're like, "Oh, Manhattan," and I'm like, "No, not quite. A little bit further north." Definitely a small town, but a sports town for sure. A lot of good athletes have come from my area. So I grew up, watching the Premier League and, having ambitions of being a professional soccer player. So now to be in the Premier League representing AFC Bournemouth, be in the FA Cup currently, trying to make a run for it to the final and play in Wembley at one day at the end of the season. It's amazing to see that they're making a stop in NYC.
Yeah, growing up as a kid, what did the FA Cup just mean to you? When you're watching on TV, I mean, was that something that you really remember early on in your soccer career?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, something I always found really special about cup tournaments or tournaments in general, specifically the FA Cup and being in the Premier League, is that you're always rooting for the underdogs in those competitions. It's a format where you can win 4 or 5 games and play in a final and ultimately win a trophy. And for me, playing for a club like Bournemouth, we want to be a team that can make it far and have a chance to win a trophy.
Speaking of underdog, Tyler, you mentioned coming from a small town. Less than 6,000 people, I think, growing up in your town. Do you kind of carry that sort of mentality? Do you feel like you were underdog? And obviously now you've reached, the pinnacle for a lot of people for their soccer careers. But I'm curious, how you feel about that.
Yeah, I feel I've always had an underdog mentality, kind of that grit that you need to be successful and become successful. I've always played with a chip on my shoulder. I think everyone would describe me as a pretty competitive person. But growing up with brothers myself and being one of the older ones, my brothers were always battling with me, whether it was on sports or in school or whatever it was. So I've just come from a competitive household in general. So you always have to have a chip on your shoulder.
Definitely, definitely. And speaking of New York, MetLife Stadium will be hosting the 2026 World Cup final with such a diverse backdrop here in New York City and New Jersey, of course. What do you think that energy will just be like? I mean, I know it's still ways away, but I'm curious what your thoughts on that atmosphere when the day comes.
Oh, I think it's going to be unbelievable. I mean, it's not often that in your professional career you have an opportunity to play in a home World Cup. So, for me, just the thought of being in the U.S. is special. Nonetheless, having an opportunity to hopefully play in a World Cup final in your home state or home tri-state area, that's just going to be amazing. I mean, I hope that a lot of my family and friends are going to be able to come out and support. But the support in general being in the U.S. is going to be amazing.
I know. And for you, Tyler, speaking of World Cup, you became the first Black player to captain the U.S. men's national team through a World Cup. What did that designation just mean to you personally?
It meant a lot. It's something that I feel like I've been working for my entire life. Leadership is something that I take, very, very seriously on and off the field, making sure I represent, my teammates well, my club well, my country well. To do that on a national stage where, all eyes are going to be on you at all times. Obviously, that came with the lack of experience for sure. But I'm happy that, with the way it went, my teammates supported me, my coaches supported me in every situation. My family, most importantly, raised me to be a leader and have confidence in my ability. And that's something I wanted to represent for a long, long time now. So the World Cup in Qatar was an amazing experience. And that's specifically why I can't wait for a World Cup in the U.S.
Absolutely. And, in a lot of ways, Tyler, you've become a model of, Black representation in soccer. And I'm just very curious, from your perspective, how do we increase participation of people of color across the sport? Does it start at the grassroots level? How do we make more strides in that realm?
Yeah, it's super important. I think in the grassroots levels where everything begins, right? You have to give these opportunities to kids in communities where they don't really often get these opportunities. For me specifically, I was fortunate to come from a household where I had, that was a single mother at first, and she worked extremely hard to be able to make money, to put me in situations where I was able to succeed. And then later on, when she met my stepfather, who I call my dad every single day. He's, provided me with so much. He provided me with more opportunities than ever. So it really comes from the grassroots level, people like myself and people of color, making sure that we represent the game in the right way. So these kids have role models that they want to learn from and grow from and participate from. For me specifically, I had a lot of role models growing up in the sport, being a part of New York Red Bulls. We had a lot of people of color representing the first team well, whether it was Thierry Henry, Bradley Wright Phillips, people of that nature with big names in the sport. You just want to be the best role model you can. But I think that represents at the grassroots level, there needs to be more inclusion for sure.
Definitely. And, kind of going back to World Cup for a little bit, 2002, we all remember that memorable run for the men's national team, U.S. men's national team, and where they reached the World quarterfinals. And, it was a great moment for the country. And, obviously you're leading a new generation of players on that roster now. And, how confident are you that this can happen again, right? Potentially even further than the quarterfinal, but.
Yeah, I think we have our eyes set on even bigger ambitions than reaching the quarterfinals. I think you really have to believe in your ability to make it to a final and win something. I think in a lot of these situations, a little bit of luck goes a long way. You need a lot of things to go your way in that moment in time. You need players to play well. You need crowds to support you. You need a whole different level of support in these situations. But that's something that we have. We have the players that are capable of doing that. A lot of players playing at a high level now. I was only 3 years old when they made the run in 2002, but I'm hoping that the generation that was watching them during that time are now going to be fans of us and be able to support us in our next run that we make.
Definitely. And from a business standpoint, Tyler, you've partnered with Nike, A-Game, I'm sure companies have reached out to you for your services. What's your approach when it just comes to brand partnerships? How does that work for you?
Yeah, it's super important that everything that I do is authentic to me and the brand that I want to create. I think that I'm definitely different than a lot of athletes. I think I represent something, a lot bigger than myself. The area that I come from, not everyone has, a similar story to myself. But, when I'm picking the brands that I want to work with, specifically brands like A-Game or a brand like Nike, that's such a massive company. It's brands that I have deep relationships with, and I want to create a relationship that lasts more than, let's just, do a couple posts on Instagram and get paid. For me, it's about creating something deeper, making sure that they match my ambition as well, whether it's growing the community or growing my own brand, making sure that, everyone is involved on the same page. It's something that's super important to me. And I have a lot of amazing people working around me to make sure that comes to fruition, that we're not just having, these basic talks of, here's a figure of money and here's a couple posts and that's where it ends. It's more about building the community around me and making sure that whatever I'm doing, they're growing with me.
Absolutely. Definitely. And like you mentioned today, we've talked a lot about the men's national team, but obviously you're currently playing for the Cherries, AFC, Bournemouth. The EPL club has seen actor Michael B. Jordan become a minority investor as of late. What do you just think of celebrity? How do you think celebrity limited partners can truly move the needle in terms of value and added exposure for a club?
Yeah, I mean, for a club like AFC Bournemouth, I think it's an amazing collaboration that they've done with Michael B. Jordan. I think everyone knows the name and his name and brand speaks for itself. But he stands for someone that's trying to grow the sport as well. And I think especially in America, when you can have these huge celebrity figures try and help grow the sport, it's going to grow even at a quicker rate. So, I've had amazing conversations with Michael B. Jordan, and he's everything you'd expect, super down to earth, very authentic to who he is, or who he comes off as, I should say. But he's just an amazing person. So to have someone like that as an investor in your club that you play for is really special, because not every club has that. So it's nice to see owners that are really invested in the team and the culture.
Definitely. Would you be interested in joining a club ownership one day? I know you're focused on the main thing right now, but how much consideration have you given that?
Absolutely. No, I definitely want to be part of an ownership group at one point or another. I think that, your experience in the sport, specifically soccer, obviously in this case, you can have a lot of good feedback on how to grow a club. But yeah, just sports in general. I love the sport culture, the camaraderie of a team, and how to grow something, specifically projects. For instance, the owner, Bill Foley, who's the owner of the Las Vegas Knights in the NHL, has already had success there. Now he's taken over a club like AFC Bournemouth, and he wants to do the same thing. So I think when you have a project and something that's not already at its endpoint, it's super interesting and super exciting. So I would definitely want to do that.
Definitely, for sure. And obviously, MLS is having a moment. Season just started. You were a homegrown product of the New York Red Bulls. Would you make a return one day, Tyler, to the Major League Soccer?
Depends what they're paying. Depends what they're paying. I'll leave that up to my agent. No. Listen, I would. The New York Red Bulls holds a definitely a sentimental part of my career in my heart. It means a lot to me. They gave me my first opportunities. I know so many of the people in the club that have helped it grow. And yeah, they mean a lot to me. So I would definitely always consider it, always open to a return. But it depends at the end of the day.
The cheddar is always important, no doubt about it. As we wind down here, Tyler, you've had you're young, but you've also had a lot of experiences in your career. And, if you can leave us with one, what's been the best business lesson that you've learned so far in your professional career?
Best business lesson. Best business lesson. Yeah. It's a great question. I would say in business, you can never really trust anyone. I think that's super important. You have to always go with your gut instinct at the end of the day. You can meet so many amazing people and create so many amazing relationships, but at the end of the day, everyone wants what they want. So you have to, stick to your gut at the end of the day and trust your instinct, do your research. I found that that's super important. Make sure that you're educated on everything in every conversation that you go into, because your education and your knowledge at the end of the day is what's going to get you by.
Love that for sure. Doing the back end work, right? Absolutely.
Exactly.
Well, there you have it, folks. From the man himself, Tyler Adams. Tyler, I appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks for having me.